You want how many? Alright guys, hey, welcome back to the shop. So next up is an absolutely huge project for me. I've got some drawings up here behind me, my usual shop drawings, and I'll put a picture up on the screen here for you to see. What you see in front of me here is some rough breakdown for 6 executive style desks that we're building for a local client here. And I just want to toss a huge thanks to Jeff, who graciously gave up his time this weekend to come up here and help me mill lumber. What a huge help. So we're just currently milling lumber. We have a rough breakdown in size. Most of this stuff is really flat, but we're going to get it the rest of the way flat at the joiner and the planer and rip to some rough widths and whatnot. And I'm not going to shoot a lot of footage of that because there's milling in every video I think I've ever done. So you guys know what the milling looks like. I will put a little bit in here, but not a lot of it. And then we'll get after building these first back panels up here on these desks. So as I said, I'm not going to show a lot on the milling. Usual stuff, start at the joiner. A little out of sequence, we moved over to the table saw next to get some rough widths. And then I didn't even film us at the planer because all we did was bring it down to thickness. So next up was a cope and stick set in the router table to start getting all of the grooves before we could do a dry fit and make the panels. The back panels in this desk are quite large, so wanted to just get all the parts run before changing the settings on the machines. So we ran all the verticals first, and then we switched over and ran all of the ends. Now you notice here I don't have a backer board on my slide, but this was just a test piece, and I did come back and add a backer board to that to prevent some of that tear out. And here you can see kind of our first dry fits. This is my little DJI camera that I just use for some live shots like this. The end panels are these smaller ones that you see, and of course the back panels are the really large wide panels. So starting day 2 for Jeff and I, it was all about the legs. We went ahead and milled up all the leg material first, and then of course went to the domino to attach these legs. The domino was just the natural choice for this since it was quick and accurate and it allowed me the repeatability. I really needed to put 6 of these desks together pretty much all at the same time. So I really have no intentions of boring you with a bunch of footage of me sanding these panels. But I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about this particular one since it's a little unique. This is the standalone leg on the side of the desk, and you notice it has an actual plywood panel on the inside. Again, this was connected with the domino, but this is the inside where your knees would go on the desk, and what I'm sanding here is the outside of the desk. But this is the only panel that's done this way, so I figured I'd take this little sanding opportunity to point out that this was the one different panel. And in the background there you see the large panel. It's actually glued up and in clamps, so making good progress. And this is where I'm installing that panel on that back panel you just saw in the clamps. Again with dominoes, and everything came together pretty nicely. You see the plywood there on the inside where your legs go. All right, so I just wanted to take a minute and kind of catch everything up because I know I went super fast in this video and did not do a great job of filming everything. As I mentioned up front, I had some help in the shop, so it was more important to utilize that help than it was to stop and film everything. And I'm back by myself again, so I'm going to try to do better moving forward. But I just wanted to catch you up to where we're at. Obviously, I have kind of 6 bases here, and they're all just dry fit together. With the exception of the panels themselves, they're glued up, but for instance, the ends, they are not glued on yet. As well, I've made all of the partitions. This would be for this inside wall, for the drawer case. And then these parts here are all of the rails for the drawer openings. And these parts over here are this last leg that has to go on. Now, I'm kind of at a point where I'm out of batching things out mode, and I just need to focus on one at a time with the parts that I have and get things assembled and actually start getting these cases glued up. So I'm going to take them one at a time. I'm going to put them up on the bench, take care of the sanding, and there's a couple little flaws here and there that I need to get through, and I need to take care of those and fix them as best I can. And get on the glue up. And like I said, I'm going to try to do a better job with filming and try to keep everything up to date on that as well. So let me just grab this first one off of this pile, and I'm going to walk through everything I'm doing on this one. And then I'm going to put the camera away for a while and do the same thing on the other 5 desks. So stick around, that's what's next. I always find it's best to work in sub-assemblies, so I am starting with these side panels first. Getting them glued up, get them into clamps, let them cure for a while before moving on to gluing up the entire section. And of course everything got sanded up, as well as a gentle 1/8 round over on all the appropriate parts. Those of you that have followed me for any length of time know I am not a fan of pocket screws. However, in this case, they were just the right option to attach that inside center panel to the back panel. Yeah, I could have used the domino, but I don't think the domino actually would have been as fast and easy in this particular case. So I used pocket screws. And besides, it made a perfect clamp for me to add the round over to one of these smaller parts. With everything dry fit nicely, it was finally time to get around to the first base glue up. Again, the domino just made this quick and easy, and the repeatability was great. So I glued all the dominoes in and then set the panels in place, and I used the woodpecker's corner squares just to get everything dead on square. And then the pipe clamps were the only thing I had long enough to reach this long desk to get everything glued up. But I checked everything for square and just put a little pressure on those dominoes, and man, it just came out great. So this probably was the most stressful glue up in this entire project, really. It's a lot of parts with the drawer dividers and the dominoes and pocket screws and all of that, but ensuring that everything was square, because being just a little bit off here would really affect the fit of the drawers later. So yeah, one of the more stressful glue ups in this one, but that's okay. That's what makes woodworking fun. Of course, I got everything glued up here, and I got clamps added to pull all of those drawer dividers in place. And once all that was clamped up, I added the corner squares, again, to make sure that everything was squared up as best as it could be, to make drawers easier later. And then, of course, last but not least, once everything was square, or as square as I could make it, I went ahead and actually installed those pocket screws. Now, they did land on a solid chunk of wood, but that was by design and plan, so that all worked out the way it should. Next up was installing the Blum undermount drawer glides. I did not film me making drawer boxes for this project because I made them exactly the same way as I've made them in several other videos. So you can go check those out if you want to see how they were built. They did just fit awesomely. So all that attention to detail at making sure everything was square really paid off. Okay, well, it seems I forgot to turn the camera on again and just kind of got carried away. So take two here and just show you what's going on. I created all of the bottom moldings are just glued on. They just have a simple round over. And of course, you have to get kind of creative with the clamping. And then I just did a smaller, roughly 3/4 by 3/4 molding around the top. And this is what I'll attach figure eights to for mounting the top. Did I really need the upper one? Probably not, but I just thought it dressed it up a little bit. So anyway, yeah, we're going to move on. You can't see it just off camera here. I'm going to have to glue up panels for the bottom drawers. They're just a little bit wider than any of the stock that I have. And I didn't really want to make a custom order, so I did a little grain matching and glue up, and that panel is ready to go. I'm going to size it, and I will turn the camera on when I install the drawer fronts here. So yeah, that's what's next. So since all the drawers and the desks are all the same from desk to desk, I went ahead and just made a jig for locating all of the pulls. This will ensure everything is consistent from desk to desk and looks the way it's supposed to. The last thing to do to all of these drawer fronts is to create the edge profile on them. I attempted to match pretty close to what they had in their offices. I'm sure I wasn't exact, but I know that I came pretty close. So I mounted the drawer fronts pretty much like I always do, using a spacer and then using the actual handle holes to attach the drawer front to the box. Now in this case, you see I have quite a bit of blue tape on the case, and this is just to help me with alignment, making sure that everything stays where it should, to include the spacing as well as the side to side. So having those lines on that blue tape really aids in that. So I attached the drawer front just like I always do with screws, and then I came back and added a countersink and a pilot drill on the inside and actually attached the drawer front, and then I backed the screws out so that I had a temporary handle to operate the drawer. So the last thing to do for all of these drawers was to create the plugs, and there were a lot of plugs. I started over here at the drill press with a 3/8 plug cutter and just cut all of the red oak plugs that I was going to need for the drawers. I then went over to the bandsaw and started releasing all of those plugs. You notice I've added some blue tape as a zero clearance, and I've clamped on some wood on the table to act kind of as a corral, if you will. Because these little plugs, they can end up all over the floor and everywhere else. And then I got to enjoy the glorious repetition of installing all of these plugs. Now, in hindsight, I wish I would have installed these without the drawer fronts on, and I actually did that on the other 5 desks, but this particular shot, the drawer fronts are on. Then I came back with a flush trim saw and got them all cut and went to the sander to go ahead and sand them all flush, as well as clean up the sides of the box. And finally, we're on to finish here using Fitty's hard wax oil, and this can is just about all done, so I wanted to use this up before opening a new can. I applied with a foam brush and then wiped it back with a Scotch-Brite pad. I started with the drawer front since I needed to do both sides of those before moving on to the desk itself and applying 2 coats to the desk as well as the drawer fronts. Okay, so I know it's a little hard to see, but 6 desk bases are done. I left one uncovered here, trying to get some of it in the video. The problem I'm having with the video right now is that I have all the top material laid out and kind of organized on my various work surfaces, and it's a lot of material. And I know I've gone pretty fast through this. Video-wise, it's gone fast, but building 6 of these, to put it in perspective, since the last time I turned the camera on has been probably a week and a half. Total length of time so far into this project is right around 3 weeks. In fact, I think today is the 3-week mark. So next up, I'm going to start milling all of this big stuff for the tops, and I'm not going to put that on camera. It's just a lot of milling and getting ready to go. And I will turn the camera back on again at glue up time, and we'll start getting tops together. And these all get breadboard ends, and so there'll be quite a bit of footage still on this. But yeah, a lot of work over probably the next 2 weeks or so to get tops done on these and hopefully get these delivered out to the client. So I thought I would throw this shot in just to show what a disaster my shop really is during mid-project, and just how much of my horizontal space is used up with all of this material. So I spent a fair bit of time picking out the best grain matches that I could, and we're finally ready for the glue up. I'm not using any dominoes here. They're not needed. This is a long grain to long grain glue up, and these boards frankly milled really nicely and were fairly flat. I'm still going to add a couple of clamps at the seams just to hedge my bets and cut down on the amount of sanding I have to do later. And then, of course, I'll clamp from both over and under for the best flatness I can get. So I know I said I wasn't going to show a bunch of sanding, and that's not really my intention to show you a bunch of sanding. But I thought I'd take this opportunity to talk about a couple other things here that is important. One, I'm using the Festool Rotex here with 80 grit paper on it, and it flat hogs material and really made short work of sanding all of these slabs. It was still an all-day process to sand all of the slabs. The other thing, and it doesn't show up super well here, but if you notice the end grains, they're actually alternated. So the 2 outer ones are cupped up and that middle one is cupped the other direction. Again, this just hedges my bets for keeping everything good and flat. And I used the track saw with the woodpecker's square edge on the guide rail to go ahead and cut these slabs to final length. They are over width, and I'm good with that for now in preparation for the breadboards. So the breadboard stock was milled at the same time as all of the top material, so it is dead on for thickness. I created a story stick here based off of center because this material is all still oversized. So by working off center, I knew that I could center the mortises correctly. I marked a start and stop point, and then it was time to go ahead and start routing those grooves. Now, just like I always do, I'm using a router with dual edge guides. And I believe it took me about 4 passes to get full depth on all of these. But I marked the start and the stop points first, and then I came back and routed various thicknesses or depths until I reached the final depth. And I'm shooting for about 1 3/4 inches here. So with the mortises all cut, it was time to go ahead and cut the tenons on the top slabs. I used the router with a single edge guide this time, and unfortunately the 1/2 inch bit was the best that I had. My 3/4 inch bit that I would normally use had just seen its better days, so I chose to stay with the 1/2 inch bit. Word to the wise, order what you need before you start a project like this. This meant it took about 48 passes per slab to get the tenons cut for the breadboard ends.
I was very careful on the very last pass to make sure that the shoulder was very clean, so that there would be no gaps on the actual breadboard ends. So with the tenons cut, I went back to the same story stick working off of center and went ahead and marked the locations for those cheek cuts that I'm going to cut next. So as I'm cutting these tenons, I wanted to take this opportunity to explain kind of a major mistake I made here. If you remember, I said that these tenons were supposed to be about 1.75 inches. Well, I had grabbed the wrong preset square that I had in the shop, and these tenons are way too short. And I didn't catch it until way later in the process when I was getting ready to lay out for the draw bore tenons. So, long story short, I ended up having to come back and cut these tenons even deeper than they are, which was a little tricky without the shoulders there because it gave room for wobble on the edge guide for the router. The other important lesson learned here was to clamp the slabs down before trying to cut them, because you can see the slab is moving on me, and that just became a pain in the butt. The other major lesson learned on this first one, you see I'm going to use a chisel here to try to clean up the shoulder, and the chisel worked fine, but this is all end grain, so I ended up on the rest of them coming back with my palm router and a flush trim bit to go ahead and clean up the bulk of the material first and then do the final cleanup with the chisel. And here is that first dry fit. It's a snug fit, but a breadboard end should be a snug fit. I didn't have to pound them on, but I did have to tap them on. So the fit was actually really good. The only downside is that tenon was too short, and I got to do this task again. Next up was laying out for the drawbore pegs. Again, I used a story stick based off of center, and I knew that I wanted 5 pegs, and all of the pegs will be 3/8 inch diameter. Now, unfortunately, this is where I realized my huge mistake with the tenon, but fortunately, as you can see behind me, I had not cut the rest of the tenons yet, so I only had to go back and recut this one tenon to get to the correct 1.75 inches depth. Over at the drill press, I went ahead and set up to drill all of the peg holes in just the breadboard end itself. As these will be draw bore, they will be pulled slightly closer to the shoulder on the slab itself. I also milled up an extra drawer side that I had made here. It was a spare part, but I milled it to fit nicely inside the mortise to prevent blowout inside of that mortise. From there, it was just a matter of drilling holes. With the breadboards dry fit in place, I went back to that same 3/8 inch drill bit to mark the location on the tenon of the slab. Just a gentle tap with a brad point bit, and I get a perfect location for where each one of those pins needs to be. As I said, these will be draw bore, so I needed to essentially sharpen the end of each one of my dowel stock so that it would help guide it through the hole, since the hole on the tongue will be moved slightly towards the shoulder. So as I drill the holes in the tongue, I am simply moving my brad point bit about 1/32 of an inch towards the shoulder of the slab itself. The center hole is just a single through hole, But everything outside of that, I went ahead and wallowed to give about 1/8 of an inch of wood movement in the slab itself. I'll only be gluing up the middle 4 inches, maybe 5 inches or so of the slab, and then I'll be relying on these drawbore pegs to keep that shoulder tight against the slab. So as I said, I'm only going to be gluing up about the center 4 or 5 inches. And I went ahead and I did that on both ends, and then installed the breadboards, making sure that my dowel holes were lined up since these pieces are all still oversized. From there, I went ahead and added the clamps to get everything pulled up nice and tight, and making sure that there's no gaps. From there, I went ahead and drove the dowel for the middle hole, ensuring that it was glued up all the way through. All of the rest of the dowels in this drawboard got just a little bit of glue on the very bottom of the breadboard, and then again on the last maybe 1/16 of an inch on the top before driving all the way through. And that's just to ensure that the dowel pin stays in place in the breadboard itself, but there's no glue in those sections on the tongue. This is also where I switched hammers because that no bounce hammer was doing me no favors at all trying to drive these. And then of course I just repeated the process on the other side, making sure that everything was fitting the way it was supposed to. And then I checked the clamp tightness one more time, and this slab has officially got its breadboards installed and ready to come back and flush them up. Just a flush trim saw here to knock the dowels off, and then after I took it out of clamps, I flipped it over and flush trimmed the bottom ones as well. Finally, with all the breadboards on, it was time to bring everything to its final size. I used the track saw, I used the woodpecker's guide square, as well as my big 24-inch square, just to make sure everything was dead on. A mistake at this point obviously would cause me a lot of extra work. So with the entire slab trimmed to its final size, the entire slab got treated to a 1/8 inch roundover. This is exactly the same router setup that I used for softening the edges on all of the rest of the desk. And then I followed this up with some hand sanding, mainly on the corners, just to make sure that I didn't have any sharp edges there or something that was going to snag somebody and create issues. And now we finally get to add some finish to the top. Again, this is fitties, and I'm starting on the bottoms of the top since both sides have to be finished. And each side will get 2 coats. I did apply with the foam brush and wiped back with a white Scotch-Brite pad and allowed to cure most of a day before coming and adding a second coat to it. But they sure turned out nice. Once the tops had fully cured, it was time to go ahead and install them. These will be installed using figure 8s. There'll be 4 in the main base, and there will be 2 on the single leg, which should be plenty strong for this desk. And of course, these gave me one more chance to really mess up this project, and fortunately I didn't drill those pilot holes too deep. And everything seated down just like it's supposed to. Well, it seems to be a bit of a reoccurring theme in this video that I really did a poor job of capturing footage when I should have been capturing footage. Needless to say, I didn't grab many glamour shots either, mainly because there were 6 of these desks to get through. What you're seeing in these pictures is the very first desk that was actually ready for delivery. The client had actually asked for it a little early, so I went ahead and got this one all wrapped up and ready to go. And then, of course, hustled through the remaining 5 and got them delivered before I realized I hadn't turned the camera back on. And shot the ending to this video. So I hope you got something out of it. I hope you hit me up with lots of questions. And until next time, guys, take care.